So, thank you for joining us this evening on the day of commemoration for the Sinti and Roma. This evening, or this morning for me, we will be hearing three stories told by Emily Hand, by Gregory Eftime, and myself. I'm Lynn Feldman. And we shall also have a poem by Cantor Karen Weber, a poem written specifically for this program today, and a bit about us. So, we are Teach the Shower, for those who do not know us. We work in the line of memory. We teach people how to tell testimony-based stories in different kind of classes. We run a storyteller bureau in which we use our storytellers to go out into communities telling Holocaust stories. We do programs like the one you're attending this evening. We have commemorations, and we have a very special program called Les Appels, in which we pair survivors, living survivors, with young college students, Jewish and non-Jewish, for them to learn how to tell the survivor story and become their memory keeper. As part of our commemoration, Moment of Witness, we have different sections of reading where our audience participates together with us. And this is one of them. I'm not going to ask you to read it out loud, but to give you a little sense of how we commemorate not just the Jewish memory, but also the Sinti, the Roma, the LGBTQ, Jehovah Witnesses, and any other people persecuted by the Nazis during the Holocaust. All of our programs begin with story, and today is no different. We will be starting with the story of Christina, told by Greg. Gregory will be telling a very difficult story. Now, I know you all know that you have come to a Holocaust program, but I do need to give a content warning. This is a difficult story. So I shall be spotlighting Greg for us. Greg, whenever you're ready.
I'm at home with my mamio, my grandmother, my mama, my grandfather, my big brother, and my baby sister. We don't know what's coming, but we start hearing commotion, arguing, loud noises outside our house. People are yelling. We hear banging at the door, and they're yelling for us to come out. When we open the door, we see our neighbors, my friends, my family, all outside, and officers, I don't know who they are, yelling at everyone to come out. My grandpa, he doesn't want to leave his house. So they go in and they pull him out. And he was the first one to be shot and killed that day. They took us away in wagons. We didn't know where we were going, but a wagon would take one group of people, first all the men. One group at a time, the wagon would leave and come back empty, fill up and leave and come back empty, until it was my family's turn. Me and my mama and my baby sister and my big brother were already in the wagon, and my mamio, she's trying to get in the wagon with us, but an officer said, no, that's enough people on this wagon, and pushed my mamio away. There was just enough time, and my mama said, you shouldn't be alone. Take my son, let him stay with you. But my big brother, he didn't want to stay with mamio. He told mama, if they're going to kill you, I want to stay with you. So mama said, okay, mamio, keep Christina. And she agreed. So my mama picked me up, handed me over the wagon, and together we watched the wagon leave. After a while, the wagon came back, we got in, and we started making our way through town. It was about lunchtime, and the shop owner came out seeing the wagon coming by, and yelled to the officers, "It's noon, it's time for lunch. Stop, have a snack, have something to eat while the sun is up." The officers thought about it for a moment and they finally agreed and went in to eat. And one officer came out as soon as he realized they were distracted and yelled to all of us to jump out and run. So me and Mamio, we jumped out and we ran. We wandered from house to house, from family member to family member, and then from village to village. Nobody wanted to keep us there. But eventually we were stopped and we were caught by an officer and taken to Plaszów. While we were there, my Mamio made friends with a German officer, but he spoke a little bit of Polish, and we had no choice to just trust him. When he called my Mamio one night, we didn't know if he was going to send us to another camp or shoot us, but we trusted him. He led us out of the camp and told us to run. And through the night, we ran and we ran and we ran. When we got into the next village, Mamio made friends with a farmer, and he had two houses. He had a brick house and a little wooden house, and he also had 4 kids living there. So I could mix in with the kids. They would go to school. I couldn't go to school, but they would come back and tell me what they learned. And Mamio, to pay the farmer back, would go and work with him in the fields. And we were there for a while until one day Mamio and the farmer came back. And they used a word liberation, and I didn't know what this meant, but it was explained that me and Mamio can go back to our home. So we gathered our things that we had and walked back to our village in Shuchurova. When we got back to Shuchurova, one of the farmers that recognized my Mamio came and told her everything that happened. The officers went into our homes and took whatever they thought was of value, and then they would knock down our homes and they burned our gardens. Shuchurova did not look the way we remembered it. Then the farmer told my Mamio what happened to our family. They were taking us into the nearby cemetery, and anybody over the age of 10, they were shooting. So my mama and my big brother were shot. But the babies, they didn't want to waste bullets on. So the farmer told us that they would smash them into the walls of the cemetery. But we're back now. And I've made a name for myself. And I've built a community back in Shuchurova for the Roma that came home.
Thank you, Greg. Let's take a moment. That was a difficult story to hear. And you're more than welcome to write your appreciations for Greg in the chat. I'm sure he would love to see them. So let us return to our So, who were the Sinti and Roma, or as they were called in the past, the Gypsies? These were different kind of ethnocultural tribes in a way, who came to Europe around the 1400s, mainly from India. They spread through Europe as nomadic people. They developed different kind of languages and different kind of cultures. And the term gypsies or Neugers, as the Germans call them, was actually driven from Greek, which meant the untouchable. For many years, they were looked down upon, um, not trusted, not seen really as part of society. But at the beginning of the 1900s, we find that many of the Sinti and the Romani people had developed different professions that did help them integrate into society. Some created different kind of equipment, whether it would be brass or metal tools. Some were performers, and some actually stopped being completely nomadic and took permanent settlements in different places. So we have different kind of terminologies like Sinti and Roma, and that is a geographical and linguistic difference between the different ethnocultures of what were formerly called the Gypsies. In Germany, we had mainly Sinti people, and in 1939, there were less than 40,000 Sintis within Nazi Germany. It is estimated, and we do not have exact numbers, that in 1939, the same year, all through Europe, we had about 1 million Sinti and Romas. Again, these numbers are very vague. They're based on the very few researchers who do research the Sinti and Roma. Um, but those are the numbers I have, so those are the numbers I'm sharing with you. In Germany, they were not treated as well as any other minorities, and we will talk about that in a minute. I'm sorry. But I'd like to stop for a minute just to have a look at this photograph in front of us, which is a wedding from 1913. And we can see that even though we don't have the nomadic life, so to speak, but more of permanent buildings, we do see that they were not the rich part in society. And that is true all through Europe. After World War One and the establishment of the Republic of Weimar, we find that there are different laws that are established that are very much against the Sinti and the very few Romani people who were living in Germany. There actually is in the laws of the Weimar Republic, Article 109, which is a law that allows police to check and arrest Sinti and Roma men and women for anything from being a nuisance to the public. It actually says that in the law, and for either begging or being inappropriate in public. So we find that the anti-gypsy laws existed well before the Nazis come into play. What we have in front of us is a photograph of a Roma man being checked and interrogated by two German policemen. But things get worse, of course. And under Nazi rule, the anti-Jewish laws that we know, we could basically call them also anti-Gypsy laws. And the reason I'm using the term again, Gypsy and not Sinti and Roma, is because that is how the Nazis refer to them. These were anti-Gypsy laws. So we have the racial theories that the pseudoscience of racial theories that swipe over the Reich. And part of that was, of course, identifying who is an Aryan and who isn't. And the racial laws that then follow in 1935, the Nuremberg laws, the laws that protect the Aryan blood and the Aryan race, though it is written in the law about the Jews, there is a subsection that most of us never discuss, which is also the anti-Gypsy laws, which are basically exactly the same, categorizing them into three different categories: full gypsies, Michigan gypsies, which means that one of their parents was Aryan or grandparents. And there's a third subsection, which is unique for the Sinti and Roma, and that is somebody with the appearance and the behavior of nomadic life. So not necessarily a person from a Sinti family or from a Roma family, but somebody who just appears to have a nomadic life would have the same laws. Now, just to remind us, what are these laws? These laws basically say that no Aryan man or woman could marry out into um, a mixed marriage with either Jews or Sinti or Roma. The determination of who is Aryan. And the third part of the Nuremberg laws is about who is allowed to use the German and Nazi flag. Um, it's another way of pointing out who is different within society. What we're seeing in front of us is a series of photos that were, I'm sorry for the background noise, is a series of photos that were taken as part of research conducted by a man named Dr. Robert Ritter. And we can see Robert Ritter in the larger photograph, the man who's a bit more bold. Um, he was he was a psychiatrist. He was also he called himself a genealogist, not the kind of genealogist that we think of. And part of his research was researching um, the gypsies. And he went around together with many medical assistants, measuring, taking blood samples, taking photographs, filling in questionnaires, determining who are the Sinti and Roma. This was so successful in the eyes of the Reich that the Dr. Ritter actually becomes the head of the department that determines who is Aryan and who is not Aryan within the Ministry of Health in the Reich. Um, which doesn't sound like a dangerous ministry, only the Ministry of Health worked very closely with the Ministry of Police, Gestapo, in plain words. And we find that they documented their endeavors of measuring and checking who is Aryan, who's not Aryan, who's a Sinti, who's a Roma, who's a Jew. They document this not just in reports, but also in photographs, and they even invest in colored photographs in many occasions so that they could make sure that they could see the color of people's eyes, the color of their hair, and the color of the skin, because all that was measured as well. I'm just going to stop the share for a minute because when I share, I only see the slide and I don't see you guys. So I don't know if anybody has questions. And please do feel free to stop me. This isn't a lecture at university. You can stop me at any time. So all these different measurements and classifications of people begin quite early within the Reich years. And what we see is that, in the most part, nobody gets arrested or stopped for being a Sinti or a Roma just for who they are. It's usually attached to what they claim would be petty theft or disturbance in public places, etc. The first time that we see a real large mass arrest and relocation of Sinti people is in 1936, leading up to the Olympics. So we want to show a clean Germany, the Reich decides. And part of that is taking away all the street signs that said that Jews cannot walk here or gypsies cannot be in this park. But you also don't want this to exist in the public arena. So 1,000 people in total um, are deported together with these were nomadic Sintis, were relocated well into the outskirts of Berlin, where nobody can see them. Because out of sight means that we're not necessarily doing anything wrong or having any rules against anybody. So these 1,000 people were moved, but they were never allowed to go back or to continue traveling. For many of the Sinti people who were nomadic, they were seasonal. So in the summer, they would travel all over Germany, um, either performing or doing different kind of jobs. But from 1936, well into the beginning of the war, we find that this new camp that was a makeshift camp just remained as it was. They were not allowed to leave. The conditions in the place were terrible. There were only two water pumps for 1,000 people. That's not very good. It also tells us a lot about the sanitary conditions in that area. And it also explains why by 1939, we already see many causes of deaths, mainly within the younger population, um, in this makeshift camp. I'm going to pause because I've given you a lot of information up to now. We're going to hear another story. Emily will be telling us the story of Lena. And again, content reminder, all Holocaust stories are difficult, this one as well. Emily, whenever you're ready.
Bumblebee, Rue, Lena, C574. These are my identities. I was born as Rue Steinbach to Adolf and Adelaide in December of 1929 in Berlin, Germany. They called me Bumblebee. We were a happy family. With 6 brothers and sisters, I was never alone, and it was certainly never quiet. Until the Nazis came. My father, they call them Romani now, but back then they just called us gypsies, and my 2 oldest brothers were sent to a concentration camp early in Hitler's rise to power. My mother changed my name to Lena Jackson to hide that I was a gypsy. This is the first time they would hurt me. We had to stand in line for hours for food, and every time we entered a store, we had to say Heil Hitler. In school, they taught us about how dirty gypsies are, their caravans, and especially how they always steal. I was so confused. My mother would have let me have it if I ever stole. And I was a Christian just like they were. We didn't live in a gypsy community. I lived in an apartment like the rest of them. My Jewish classmates did have to wear a yellow star. They didn't know I was a gypsy until I opened my big mouth. From that day on, they would follow me home and throw stones at me. Those were hard days, but they were nothing compared to what would follow. My mother died when I was 7. She had been sick for a long time and had many operations. I tried to help with the housework as much as I could, but I was still little. I moved in with my aunt after that. She was also half gypsy, where I would stay for 2 years until the Nazis came. They broke into our house in the middle of the night and only allowed us to get dressed. We couldn't take anything with us. I was so happy. I thought something exciting was happening. We were taken to the train station and loaded into cattle cars. I was there with my brother, grandma, grandpa, niece, and sister, and it was both Jews and gypsies in the car. We were given pieces of bread and sips of water occasionally, but nothing else otherwise. I thanked God for everything I got. We were told we were going to Auschwitz, and we were on the train for 10 days. The noises and smells were the worst part. Bodily waste everywhere, little kids screaming of hunger and sickness, and grown men crying from fear. When we arrived, our heads were shaved, we were given a dress and a number on our arms. I became C574. We stayed in Auschwitz for 2.5 years before the Russians came and took us to Volkenberg. My sister was the only one who made it to Volkenberg with me. My grandparents and brother died there. My brother of malaria, and I think my grandparents just willed themselves to die. My sister's baby was put in an oven alive, and I begged to go with her, to not let her die alone. The SS officer told me if I wanted to die, I could work myself to death. I met Hitler in Auschwitz once. He seemed like a nice guy. But this man, the officer, he was the devil. In Volkenberg, we worked on parts for airplanes alongside civilians. Life wasn't so bad there. We slept on the floor and still didn't get much to eat, but we did our work and didn't cause any trouble. We went from Volkenberg to Ravensbrück and eventually on a death march to Dachau. We walked, and my sister escaped along the way. They never caught her. We were in Dachau for 2 days before the Americans arrived, and the Germans asked us to hide them. I just turned my back to them for what they had done. The day the Americans came, I was hiding under my bunk, afraid they would hurt me. This large, dark man came in and dragged me out by my ankles, and I asked him if he was going to kill me. He said, "Never. I have a little girl, just like you." He sat me on his lap, fed me chocolate, and just cried. I will never forget him crying. There was nothing left of me but skin and bones. I ended up hitchhiking to my uncle's house with other groups of people who had left from the concentration camps. I went there because when the Nazis rose to power, my father suspected things would get worse, and he told me to meet him there if anything ever happened. He had left a few days prior, and I stayed at my uncle's for 2 months waiting. My uncle would not let me leave. Eventually, I fled in the middle of the night, going from town to town. One evening, I was sleeping in a subway station when a woman woke me up and asked if I was related to Adelaide, and she told me my aunt lived here. I went running through the town and I actually got stopped by the police. I didn't realize there was a curfew, but I broke free from them and I kept running, and eventually I stood in the middle of the street and yelled, "Tante Adelaide!" And there, down the block, a light turned on. And there she was. I waited there until my dad came 2 months later. I eventually ended up living with my sister while my father went to Bavaria, where I would stay for the next few years. I took care of my sister's home and her children while she went to work. I once went to visit my dad in Bavaria, and there, at a carnival, I met the man I would marry, an American soldier named Richard. We had a wedding and a half. I had 4 children by the time we left Germany. We landed in New York after a 10-day boat trip. Richard was stationed in Indiana, then Colorado Springs. I loved Colorado. It reminded me of Germany. Our 6 children and I stayed there while Richard was fighting in the Korean War. By the time we settled in our current home of Wheeler, Texas, we had been blessed with 8 wonderful children, 4 boys and 4 girls. I don't often talk about what I've been through, the physical issues from the death march. Sometimes I think about my experiences and I get very sad and wonder what life could have been like, why this happened. It didn't help anyone. But most of all, I am so happy. I thank God because I have my wonderful children, 14 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren, and I know joy is the greatest response to hatred.
Thank you, Emily. That was beautifully told. And please, my friends, do give your appreciations to Emily in the chat. I'm sure she will appreciate your appreciation. So let us return. So we will jump straight into the war. The Sinti and the Roma are persecuted all through the Reich. Once in 1938, Austria is annexed into the Reich. The same anti-Gypsy laws are instated all over Austria. We also find that we have the first deportation outside of Germany to Austria in 1939. There are camps established. We have in Germany, Dachau. We also have camps now in Austria, and we find that Sinti and Roma, mainly men, are arrested for being who they are, not for any kind of crime, and sent off into these camps. They too have the opportunity, just like the Jewish prisoners who are sent in 1938 and 9 into these different camps, to be released if their family can obtain a visa. Almost impossible. In 1940, we find that the persecution of the Sinti and Roma become even more noticeable. We have more movement of population. And in the map that we can see in front of us, we have both camps and ghettos and cities in which we have either camps or ghettos that Sinti and Romas are gathered and deported to them. And this, for example, is the view of the Romani section of the Lodz ghetto. So the Lodz ghetto, which is sealed off in April of 1940, Lodz is in the ex-territory of Poland, annexed directly into the Reich. It's part of the Vertigau. Lodz is a closed-off ghetto. There's no coming in and no coming out. And yet we do find there was a deportation of 5,000 Romani people into Lodz, and they were separated from the rest of the population. You can even see in this photo that the building and the pavement both have barbed wires. And again, there's a street and there's more barbed wires on the other side. So even within places like a ghetto, and we see the same thing also in Theresienstadt, and we see this in Radom and in all sorts of other ghettos all over the Generalgouvernement, which is the ex-territory of Poland, that people are, populations are being moved, and Sinti and Roma are gathered from all over occupied Europe and sent into ghettos. But even within the ghetto, they are separated from the rest of the population. And in most ghettos, of course, these are the Jews. And before I go into my story, I just want to talk a bit more because I haven't talked enough. What we see is a progression in anti-Jewish laws, well, in anti-Jewish laws as well, but also in anti-Gypsy laws. And we see that the separation from population becomes more and more apparent. And once the final solution begins for the Jewish and Bolshevik populations in the East, we see the same treatment happening also to the Sinti and Romani. And I'm going to give you one example for this that I do not have a photograph for you. We all know about Babi Yar, or I think most of us know about Babi Yar. In 3 days of killing, 33,000 Jews murdered nonstop in the killing pits of the forest of Babi Yar, which is right outside Kiev, today Ukraine. At the time, it is occupied territories taken away from the Soviets, but beforehand, this was part of Galicia. What we don't talk about is that the month after September of 1941, there was also a mass murder of Romani people in the same killing pits. And this is something that we will delve into in a bit later on in this program, and that is how we remember the Sinti and Romani genocide. But this is just one sample, is that we talk about Babi Yar, we talk about it in the Jewish context, we do not talk about it in the Romani context, which we should. So, saying that, I don't need to introduce myself. I will be telling you the story of Zeli. And again, content warning, this is a difficult story. God had other plans for me. I was born into a Sinti family. We had a happy life. We lived in this lovely house that was pulled around by a truck. In the winter, the truck would stop And we would stay put for a few months, and me and my three other siblings, we would go to school. And in the summer, we would travel. You see, my father had a traveling cinema. So we got to see movies and we got to travel around Germany. It was nice. I used to, in the summer, play with the chickens we had underneath the caravan in the shade. In the winter, when we would go to school, it wasn't always nice. Sometimes they would put me and my siblings at the back of the classroom. They would whisper, gypsies. God had other plans for me. Sometimes we would hear things. You see, things were happening in Germany. In 1933, when the Nazis came, at the beginning it wasn't so bad. But then persecution started. They had laws. We couldn't even go to school anymore, not even in the winter. So my parents decided that we were going to pack everything up and we would go away. And we crossed the border out of Germany. We went to Bohemia. Today, that's the Czech Republic. And we stayed there for a while. It was already annexed to Germany, but it wasn't as bad. They weren't chasing people, they weren't arresting people so much. But you can never really escape the Gestapo. In 1940, I was arrested for the first time. And then I was released. And then I was arrested again. And every time I was arrested, I didn't do anything. I was a teenager. But I was arrested because I was a gypsy. That's what they called me. That was what they accused me of. By the third time, still in 1940, they sent me away to a camp. This was a different kind of camp. There were some of us, other Sintis, a lot of Romani. We didn't speak the same language. I spoke German. They spoke something else. I didn't want to be there. It was really bad. I planned to escape, and I met one of my cousins in the camp, and he said to me, "We need to escape." I said, "Well, yes." I did. I managed to escape. I didn't get very far. They caught me. And then they sent me to forced labor because the camp, the concentration camp, had two parts. Then they released me again. And I went back and I stayed with my family. And food was constantly a problem. We were always hungry. I had my baby girl when I was 17. She was so sweet. But then I got arrested again. And in 1943, I was the first for my family to be sent away. I was sent to Auschwitz. I was no longer Zelly. I was now Z1959, a Hefteling, a prisoner. The Nazis created a part of the camp and they called it, and I think this was cynical, but they called it the family camp. And sure enough, my family slowly came. Even my parents and my baby girl, they all came. If I thought food was bad on the outside, it was even worse in Auschwitz. I was like a raven. I stole things. I stole food, boots, a jacket. I never stole bread from somebody who needed it more. I only stole so that we could survive, so that my family could eat. I was caught one day. They put me in a standing cell. No food, no water, dark. For 3 days. And while I was standing there in the dark, I said to myself, nuts. Of course I'm going to steal again. We need to survive. I'll get out and I'll steal again. I survived those 3 days in the standing cell. I came out back to the family camp and I stole again whenever I could. I had a friend. He worked in Canada and he got things. He looked out for me. I once stole a whole loaf of bread. I didn't steal it for me. You see, one of my brothers, I saw him. He wasn't in the family camp. I saw him after the barbed wire in a completely different section, and he looked starving. So I stole the loaf of bread and I was going to throw it over the barbed wire. So I was rushing towards the barbed wire. One of the guards saw me, and a bullet, I could hear it whistling by my ear as I was throwing the loaf of bread. My brother caught the bread. In July 1944, they started collecting women to go and work somewhere else, not in Auschwitz. After they picked all these women, I was picked as well. They put us in quarantine, some section in the camp, for 2 weeks. Why? And then it was time. It was the 2nd of August, and they all put us onto the train. And the train started moving within Auschwitz, and it suddenly stopped next to the family camp. And I took my opportunity and I ran out of the train. I saw my father holding my daughter. I wanted my daughter with me. My father started arguing and he said, no, no, Zelly, she's better off with us. I said, then I don't want to go. I want to stay. But then Mengele came and he slapped me on my face and he forced me back onto the train. The train left and I arrived in a place called Ravensbrück. When we got there, we heard. They told us what happened after we left that night. 4,300 gypsies, Sinti, Roma, my family, my daughter, all dead. I managed to escape Ravensbrück as well with one of my cousins. You see, God had other plans for me. We got false papers and we went back to Germany and we found an uncle that we could stay with. We stayed with him with the false papers till after the war. And then after liberation, my two brothers, the one who got the bread, they came looking for us. They survived. It's 2018. It's the first time I've told my story. But every day since after the war, I was fighting. I was fighting for my brothers and sisters, my Sinti brothers and sisters, to be recognized so that our genocide would be recognized. In 2020, It was official. The UN they declared it officially that the 2nd of August would be our Memorial Day. Here. We shall return. So, the Sinti and the Roma found themselves in all sorts of other camps. Uh, and as such, they were also liberated. And one of the photos that I find the most amazing is this liberation scene in Bergen-Belsen. Well, it's post-liberation, a few days after, where there are here Jewish women, Sinti women, Romani women, and also Soviet women. All together, all went through the same experience. Some still in the striped uniforms, all with the short hair. So, as we said at the beginning, there are different names and there are different languages to the Sinti and the Roma, and therefore there isn't one unique name for the Sinti and Roma Holocaust. There are different names. I've listed them here. I would probably botch them completely by trying to say them out loud. But I think when we look at the diversity of names, we also understand the diversity within the Sinti and Romani people. There were different ways of looking at this and also different time periods, because memory is very often framed by the different political eras that we live in. During the Soviet time, there wasn't a lot of communication between Sinti and Roma people who lived in the West and the ones who lived in the East. And therefore, different terminology was born and used by researchers from different areas. But it is the most commonly used, especially since 2020, to just call this the Roma Holocaust, which is supposed to include all the different ones. And commemoration starts really late, as Zali tells us in her testimony that I just told you. The first time she tells her story is in 2018 in a commemoration held in Auschwitz, and what we can see is the Auschwitz Memorial and the Berlin Memorial. They're both very different, of course, but these are the two main memorials, and they're all pretty new, erected after the 1990s. And what we find is that the commemoration for these communities does not work at all like the commemoration that we see for the Holocaust that begins right after the war. We do have many activists like Zeli who right after liberation started looking for ways to memorialize and to commemorate and to have recognition, especially internationally. But we find that the prejudice that existed pre-war exists also post-war. It took a long time to come up with the numbers of victims from the Sinti and Roma. Today we know it's about 500,000. I can't give you an exact number, but that is the estimate that research has nowadays. We also know that to have an official Memorial Day is something that has to go through many different channels. So we see the interference of both the EU and the UN trying to come up with the terminology to be used and the date to be used. And there was a very big debate whether or not to have it on the 2nd of August, today, which was also the day of the liquidation of the family camp in Auschwitz, or to have it on the 16th of May. And why the 16th of May? Because of the Romani uprising in Auschwitz. There was an uprising. It wasn't very big and dramatic, like blowing up the gas chambers by the Sonderkommando. But just before the 16th of May, it was made known within the family camp that it is most likely that the camp is going to be eliminated. And the people within the camp, once they heard this, they would not have it. All of them, all the men, and many of the women in the family camp worked in the subcamps, in the satellite camps of Auschwitz, which basically means they left Birkenau, did work, whether it was in the agricultural farms or in any of the factories, and came back. They steal shovels, rods, picking up stones on the way, anything that they could use as weapons. And on the morning of the 16th of May, when the SS surround the family camp, they barricade themselves in and they refuse to go out. And they're threatening that they will beat to death anybody that comes near. This commotion goes on for hours. At the end, the SS decide they've got better things to do. They've spent too long on this. They'll come back another day. That other day came on the 2nd of August. But on the 16th of May, nobody was sent to the gas chambers. So there was a very big deliberation. Do we do a Memorial Day on the day of heroism or on the day of destruction? And the end, the day of destruction was chosen. That's the powers that be. I do not know why that date was chosen, but it was. And once that actually was set in stone, so to speak, we start seeing commemoration services taking place all over Europe, not just in Auschwitz, not just by the memorial in Germany, but also in Lodz and in Radom and in other towns within Germany and in Austria. The Romani and the Sinti survivors and their descendants come together, usually with officials, and have their commemorative ceremonies. And let me bring back our slides. And we're going to take another little break from listening to me. And we are going to listen to Cantor Karen Weber, who will be reading us her poem, Hope Has Four Strings.
Hope has four strings, a violin placed in the crook of my elbow at four, like a songbird with strings. My petite fingers find a lyrical passage and sparks fly from the bridge when I bow a frenzied dance. I play cafes and weddings, a soundtrack of jubilation, until the music pauses. In 1938, they come from my family, friends and neighbors hauled away in wagons or shot as they walk out. In the camp, they tell me, play, play, your violin and you, it will earn you scraps of food. You will live another day. From my platform, the violin notes cover the screams of Romani women as they are paraded by me. My fingers seize, then turn to water. My eyes tremble, and beads of sweat form on my wrists. I play Hungarian folk tunes, songs from operettas, Viennese waltzes, and an occasional foxtrot, an ode to Hungarian grasslands. Much of the music died with my Roma people. We were the artists, the musicians, the circus trainers, the dancers. Now, though, there is reason to hope, as a 7-year-old child somewhere holds a violin by the neck, ready to put it under his chin and play a little tune.
I was saying thank you, Karen. That was beautiful, but I was muted.
Yeah.
And please, appreciations for Karen in the chat are welcome. So we started off reading a small section out of Moment of Witness. And I'm bringing you another section from our book here. Again, we don't have to read it out loud. To show that when we commemorate the Holocaust, it is important for us at Teach the Shoah to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust, persecuted by the Nazis. Sinti, Roma, Jehovah Witnesses, LGBTQ, the asocials, as the Nazis referred to anybody who did not fit into their racial theories and their political theories. We find commemoration is something that we want to have as a community. The Holocaust and Holocaust stories, they're not just ours, many of us, the Jews. It's everybody's story. We all need to be part. And of course, we would love for you to join our commemoration on the 27th of January, 8 p.m. And of course, to read the book, Moment of Witness, which has many thought-provoking testimonies and poetry and art, as we can see. So for once, I actually managed to do this exactly in time to begin a Q&A. So I shall bring down the slides and I will open the floor for questions, thoughts, opinions, appreciations for our tellers and poet.
Question, Lynn, I put this in the chat, but you were talking about the Memorial Day and that it had been chosen to be the day of destruction. Who chose that? Was that chosen by the Romani Sinti people, or was that chosen by the UN and
It was
people outside the community?
So no, there was a committee with the UN that included members of the Sinti, the Romani, and of IRA, the International Holocaust Alliance, that came to the decision of the name, which is the Romani Holocaust Memorial Day, and not using any of the dialects to that matter. A little anecdote on the names is that there was an argument between the Sinti and the Roma on which which dialect word to use. They couldn't come to a consensus, so we went with the English Roma Holocaust Memorial Day. But yeah, it was a committee and they did have an input on when it was. I'm actually not sure because the protocol never actually states why they chose the 2nd of August and not the 16th of May. Um, I think it has to do with memory because many of the Auschwitz inhabitants on the 2nd of August 1944 remember this. They remember this as the night of the gypsies or the night of the burning gypsies, which is the worst terminology for it. Some of our storytellers actually, who are Tujis from Auschwitz, do tell stories that include the memory of that night, what it sounded like, what it felt like, and so on. So I think that's why that date was chosen because it was so associated with the family camp and what happened to it. Which, just for your general information, then becomes part of regular Auschwitz, and Jewish prisoners were sent into the area that was the family camp, B2.1 in Auschwitz. Sorry, if there were questions in the chat, I can't see them because I'm on full recording screen.
There's a question in the chat from Kathy, wondering whether Zilly, whose story you were telling, was a major figure in getting that Memorial Day declared officially. Was she part of that?
No, she was more part of the agreement for reparations for the Sinti and Roma. Her big fight was not just the recognition, but also reparations, especially after She marries a fellow Holocaust survivor, um, uh, not a Sinti, a political prisoner. And the fight was that after there is the agreement between the federal government in Germany and the state of Israel on reparations for the Jews, how could you not have reparations also for Sinti and Roma? That was a very, very big um, that was a very big cause for her, which is also one of the reasons I think why she didn't spend too much time talking about her own personal experience until much later on. She starts telling her experience when Sinti and Roma people come to Auschwitz to commemorate at the memorial before there is an official day. And that the first time that she tells her story is actually at a commemoration. It is recorded. And then after that, she gave many interviews. She is even a hologram today in Berlin. She passed away in
Wow.
2022, so she managed to see the laws being passed and the official date being established. So she did manage to get that. But yeah, and she managed to be a hologram.
Wow.
Yeah. Violet.
Thank you. Is there an organized group in the United States that memorializes this day for the Romani and the Sinti?
There is the Sinti and Romani Foundation in the US. They do a lot of different things. One of the main things they do is education. They have a lot of education material, education packs, traveling exhibits. There's also, they work also with three other organizations, one in Germany, one in Austria, and one in the Czech Republic. And together they came together, created a few different educational packs. One of them is now the official EU Sinti and Roma genocide, and there is IRA determined gave the terminology for anti-Semitism, gave the terminology also for anti-Gypsyism. So that has become part of their greater mission, both in the US and in Europe. The big project is I can't remember the full name of it, but it's something in the lines of we are all worthy of remembrance or something like that. And they go around with educational tools into schools. Not many schools take them in.
What a shame. What was the language that the Sinti spoke?
Greg, that is a question for you.
So that I'm not really familiar with, because I know that there are different groups outside of Roma that I wouldn't understand. There's a group in France called the Manouche, and they speak a version, their own language, not even a version, their own language, that when they speak, I have almost no idea what's being said. So
Okay, I
Right,
asked
but
that
a lot of
question.
a lot of the Romani spoke Romanesque, which is like a bit of Romanian and a bit of something else, right?
right. Yeah, so it's from my understanding, it's probably Sanskrit that was carried from thousands of years ago as we were migrating out of India and into Europe, and then just picked up languages, and it kind of became like Yiddish, where we just picked up different words for different things for the times we were spending in whatever countries. And so now Romanesque is its own language with the basis being an Indian language, because I can understand. I was playing on Duolingo and I was trying to learn Hindi just for fun, just to see what it was. I was shocked at how many words I knew just in a different context through Romanesque. So
Interesting.
And Sinti people spoke a dialect of German, which is a mixture of very old Germanic language, modern German, and Sanskrit. So it's a whole. I mean, when I was listening to Zelly's testimony, I speak German, but this was not the German I knew. It was difficult to follow. Thank God for subtitles. Sorry.
True. I asked these questions because during the 1960s, my older sisters, went to school with two girls who they said were gypsies. and they dressed beautifully colored clothing and had their hair all fixed in a different way. My sisters were fascinated with them, and these girls would sing. But when they sang in a language my sisters didn't know. But it was very beautiful. And then one day they were gone.
Yeah.
Thank you, Greg. And thank you, Lynn.
And
Thank you,
Violet.
Emily. It was very well done. And Karen, spot on as always.
Thank you. Tanya, I saw your comment popping up. Yes, you do have a couple in 80 for 80. 80 for 80 was a project we did last year. Last year? Or was it 2 years ago? I don't even know where I am date-wise. But it was for the 80th anniversary of Auschwitz. Yeah,
So
last year.
not this past January, the January before, but it was
Right.
last year.
Yeah, it was last year. So 80 stories over 80 days between International Holocaust Memorial to Yom HaShoah, 80 stories from Auschwitz. We do have a couple of Sinti and Roma stories there. And as Tanya mentioned, she has a couple of stories, and Judy Stone, one of our other tellers, tells also the story of the night of the burning. Yeah, it was a topic in Auschwitz for sure. Any other thoughts?
Let's hear from the storytellers. I'd love to hear from the storytellers.
So that was going to be my next thing. So I'm going to spotlight Emily and Greg. And let me find Greg now. Hey, yay. And Greg. And tell us, my friends, how did you work on your, and actually let's add Karen because her process for the poem should be included. So tell us, our friends, about your process in working on your story and working on your poem and how you felt dealing with this material. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, so I felt very lucky. I had almost a 2.5 hour testimony, so that provided me with so many different sort of parts of her life that she was really able to tell, and so much to share, so much she wanted to share. I think what was really important to me or what stood out was the idea of identity, right? Because everyone who experienced the Holocaust in some way was a different person afterwards, whether that was, physically, emotionally, mentally, whatever. And she literally became a different person afterwards. So Lena still goes by Lena Jackson instead of Ruth Steinbach, which really stood out to me. And so you could tell there were places where she was really happy to share her story. She loves her kids. And there were places that were harder for her, but she found it really important. And part of my undergraduate research was non-Jewish victims, and I talked a lot about Romani and how a lot of the pre-war prejudice affected their persecution during and after the Holocaust. And I think sharing these stories is so important because, as she says, like joy and memory are some of the best ways to combat hatred. And if we remember them and their stories get to live on, then that really means something.
Thank you. Greg.
So for me, I like to say that the story picked me. It was Bashert. I was asked to do the program a few years ago, and so I went to the Yad Vashem website and I looked under the Romani stories to see who or what was there. I wasn't sure what to expect when I clicked on the site, and there was her name, and for some reason it just something told me click on this story. I clicked on her story, and her story mirrors my grandmother's so much. It was a little uncanny that it kind of gave me goosebumps. So then I later found her testimony on YouTube, and then listening to her testimony, it just pulled me in even more that her story was so important and who she became, not only because she was a child going through this, again, the same age as my grandmother, but then who she became out of this experience and coming back home. And she prided herself on being a good student And she was such a respected student that the other children actually didn't tease her for being mixed, because half of her family were Roma and the other half were Polish. And so because of it, she was expecting, typical prejudice. And because of her intuitiveness in classes and everything, the children and the teachers were very impressed with her. And she then later on comes back and starts teaching and rebuilding the community in Shuchurova and her nearby village, because I don't believe she lived in Shuchurova for much longer after she went to school. But then, so that was my process. I started telling the story. Again, just digging in through just family history and the traumas there and the connectedness. It just felt very natural and easy for me to tap into that, just tapping into the same stories. And I also had nieces and nephews right at around the same age as her brother and baby sister that were murdered. So again, I was able to tap into those feelings, thinking of them and just how I would feel and these things.
The
I have a
story lives
question.
within you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have a question, Greg. You've told this story a bunch of times in a bunch of different contexts.
Mhm.
Is it different telling it in this context where the whole program is focused on that community?
That's a really tough one. I don't know if I sense any difference in it being focused specifically on this community, because I feel like every Holocaust story is important. And so I respect that we have a focus on this community, but I think it wouldn't be the Holocaust without all of the voices. So to say, oh, we need a hyper focus here, then that means, well, then what about this other community? And it just, to me, feels like there's this tug and pull of everybody's voices needing to be heard. So I appreciate it. I think it's very well received in my heart when I know we do this. But anytime I've told her story in the mixed programs, I'm equally as moved emotionally with Christina's story and whatever the other stories that are being presented in that program.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Karen.
So each time I'm tasked with creating a piece, an original piece, to go with other pieces, I begin researching and I sit down and I start reading. And if something grabs me, I look and I feel for something to grab me, something to hook me. And I was reading, and I was reading about this boy who was playing, his violin. So then I started looking, well, are there any other stories like that? Because it felt almost like a composite story. And in fact, because there were so many musicians, because they had this tradition and they started at 3 or 4 years old, that it just became something that grew into the poem. And then as I listened to the stories, I changed something. Well, when we got on and we were talking about Romani versus Roma, I wanted to refer to myself as Roma, my people. And then there was something, and wagons, Greg, you mentioned, versus carts, which I had. So I listen to all the other stories around me because I feel that a poem is simply a story in a condensed form. It's like taking something and compressing it. So the boy doesn't have a name. He grew up into a man, he doesn't have a name. But the experiences that he had are then integrated into this piece.
Thank you so much. Any questions for our tellers and poets? Now's the time. And you can just go off mic and ask.
Can you tell about your story also, Lynn?
Oh, sure. Thanks. Yes. So it actually started from the 3 minute 80 for 80 project where I told 3 minutes of Zelly's story. But Zelly stuck with me. Something about this person who goes through such horrific things, and she keeps saying to herself that God had a bigger plan for her. And in one of her last interviews, she said she still thinks that God has another plan for her. She just hasn't figured it out yet. But she did so much, right? She fought so hard for her Sinti brothers and sisters, and she was so brave in telling her story at some point, publicly, not just for an archive like many others did. They just gave their interview, but she went out there as much as she could, and she went and she talked to schools when she was in her 90s. That's when she starts doing this. So so there was something about her that I kind of knew that I wanted to do more of her story. And the more I was digging into her story, the more I was like, this, she's like a little superhero. And I really do mean little. She's a petite woman, was a petite woman, but really a superhero. And I was so drawn to how she would say the worst things like, oh, my daughter would be in her 80s now and she would have children and grandchildren, so nice, and da da da. But, she was murdered by the Nazis. And it's kind of this heart-wrenching moment. And 2 seconds later, she's like, but we need to go out and talk about this. And she's like all adamant to do things, and this dissonance of this extreme sorrow, and yet God had another plan for her, right? So yeah. So part of my process was actually listening to Greg, and I was listening to Emily's testimony before she started turning it into a story, and I kind of figured that Zelly worked well with both of them. So, and here we are.
I have a question about that story. Who was the father of her daughter?
She never says, and she was 17.
Right. That's in some really iffy positions. That's why I kind of wonder.
So we kind of me, myself, and I think that it's probably because she was so young and they were religious in a way. This was out of wedlock. She was in and out of prison and then of a camp. And who knows, it could have been somebody who was with her. The people in this camp in Bohemia, they were all Sinti. So it could have been somebody that she knew or got to know. We just don't know. She never says. Um, she speaks very freely about afterwards getting married and meeting, another Holocaust survivor and falling in love and creating a home and da 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 da. But about the father of the baby, she was 4 when she was murdered in Auschwitz. But the father of the baby, we don't know who that was. Other thoughts? Okay, I will take us off
Oh,
spotlight. Oh, yes,
but just
please.
before we wrap up, I wanted to see if we were going to talk about coming attractions. So,
Sorry?
coming attractions,
Yeah,
things
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay,
Yeah, I'm just taking off spotlights
got
so
it.
also I can see everybody because I'm not seeing anybody. Um, and- okay, now I see you all again. Hello again. So yeah, let me pull up our slides because we do have a lot coming up and I want to tell you all about it. So, first, is it next week already? Yes, next week. Next Wednesday, we have a coffee house featuring Linda Duke. And on Sunday the 16th, we have a stage reading to Karen's play, Seeing Red. Highly recommend, very different. It's breaking out of our Teach the Shower molds and seeing something a bit different. So I recommend you join us. We also have coming up in August our third installment of Echoes of the Past, Operation Barbarossa. This chapter will be about bystanders or witnesses. Again, highly recommend. This is more of a conversational program where we delve into a topic, in this case, the bystanders to Operation Barbarossa. We tell a bit of story, but also we have a lot of conversation. And I'm already giving you a preview for September. We have a program for high holidays, so storytelling and a bit of history about the holidays in the camps and ghettos. We have, why did I go backwards? I do not know. We have another coffee house. In September, we'll be featuring Debbie Berlin, and we have our last installment of Echoes of the Past. And this one will be about memory of Operation Barbarossa. And if you want to be able to do what we did tonight in storytelling, please join our upcoming class, Tuesdays starting October 6th for 6 weeks. Come, learn, do yourself, become storytellers, keep a memory, take it into your communities. This is everybody's story, not just ours.
What
And
time is that? What
the
time are those
class,
sessions? Yeah,
the class will be 6:30 to 8:30 Eastern time in the evening.
thank you.
And my pleasure. And we were Teach the Shoah. So, on behalf of Teach the Shoah, myself, Dr. Deborah Fripp, our executive director, who's with us today working tech, Mrs. Violet Neff Helms, our co-founder and senior storytelling director, who's with us today, Kathy, who had to leave early, but she is our co-storytelling director. Myself, the director of Holocaust Scholarship and general manager, and of course, our amazing Karen Weber, our poet, but also our peer support person, and everybody else in our team, Emily Hand, our historian, and of course, our storytellers. And today, that is Emily and Greg. Thank you so much. And Tanya, of course, from our board. Thank you so much. Please stay in touch with us, either through Facebook, Instagram, our website. This program will be uploaded onto YouTube in a few days. And you can reach us all by our first names at teachtheshoah.org. So Lynn at Teach the Shoah, Deborah at Teach the Shoah, etc., etc.